Good. Do we have more questions from the floor? I have some more from the website. We have one there, and then I'll take one. I'll ask one from the website. Microphone.
Hi, a question for Peter again. It's regarding the shale gas as a game changer for Europe. The debate here, as we've heard from the DG Environment officials, about shale gas in Europe for Europeans as a means of achieving the same level of security of supply as the US. It's kind of a strange way of looking at it when you've got shale gas developments happening in the Ukraine, you've got gas fields being discovered off the coast of Cyprus, you've got Israel becoming a major energy power in the Middle East. Have you looked at how what Europe needs to do today to benefit from a global shift in the gas market to take advantage of the descending price that's happening globally? If you get shale gas deposits out of British Columbia heading to the Pacific coast, you've got gas deposits off the coast of Tanzania. I'm wondering if we're maybe looking at this as through the wrong lens. This is a larger debate, and Europe should look at positioning itself in that discussion as opposed to reacting to just one aspect of the debate.
Yeah,
Looked at that.
no, it's a good point. I think there's a couple of thoughts I have on that. One is that, at least in the base case, we actually think that the impact of shale export or gas exports from North America on European pricing might be greater than the impact of shale production in Europe. Because more LNG exports from North America means that you have lower cost LNG competing in the marketplace. And it means that we no longer need the most expensive LNG supply sources, which are mostly in Australia and Russia. And if those are no longer needed, then the cost of LNG in Europe or in Asia will be lower. And there are different views on it. I think the numbers we end up with suggest that you could have LNG, the break-even cost of LNG in Europe, being more like 10 or 12 instead of that 16 or 18 that it's at the moment. And so even if we don't have a great deal of shale production in Europe, and if LNG is the price setter, it could be a much lower price setter. That would be clearly a benefit in terms of total cost of gas supply in Europe. I think there's another aspect to this, which we're talking about shale gas. We haven't really talked about light tight oil, which is sort of its cousin on the oil side in North America. But ultimately, growth in light tight oil production in North America could lead to lower oil prices. And if we continue to have oil-linked prices on some of our imports, that could actually, again, have an even bigger impact on European gas prices than indigenous shale gas production in Europe might have. It's a little facetious, but if Europe wants to have low gas prices and other than LNG exports out of North America, maybe we should be investing in light tight oil development in the US.
Yeah.
I just want to refer to an interview of the chief executive officer of E.ON, a German, well-known German energy company, who in the Financial Times, I think it's on the 17th of October, if my recollection is good, where he said that the benefits, the larger benefits from shale gas for Europe would be shale gas exploitation in China. Because that would basically make more gas available from the natural, the usual exporters to the EU. And also, sorry, second point on the price.
And where does that leave the Europeans? Is the conclusion therefore that
the conclusion was that the most significant effect on prices would be from the making available more gas internationally, and therefore lowering the price of imported LPG. Rather than. So it does not mean that we, again, don't misunderstand me, it does not mean that we should leave the shale gas underground, but let's not overestimate the price impact of domestic exploitation of shale gas, because otherwise we will be disappointed if we draw too much hopes.
There's another consideration, which is whether the regulatory framework means European companies don't develop the expertise in that technology, which could be sold to the Chinese.
No, again, provided there is adequate environmental and climate safeguards that are being implemented, that the risks, the objective risks, as well as the perceived risks are addressed, and then let's go ahead. But we need to learn also from the U.S. experience. I mean, the U.S. has done, as shale gas revolution, has been intervening in a particular legal context, and the U.S. has been tightening up progressively and most recently its own legislation. We have all heard about the Halliburton loophole. So this has facilitated, to a certain extent, the development. I mean, the concerns now in the US have led the US as well as Canada to tighten up their legislation. So again, what should we follow the same course or transpose the measures that they have been, that they are setting in place?
I think we had another question.
Oh, it's okay.
It's okay. It's been dealt with. Okay. One avenue we haven't explored is actually about the costs of extraction. We've talked about reserves. We've talked about other things. What are your views on the cost of extraction and the issue of infrastructure?
Maybe my sort of first comment on that is we just don't know. I mean, it's really too early to say whether it's going to cost or how much it's going to cost in Europe compared to North America. I think what we can assume is that for the same quality of resource, it's not going to be any cheaper over here than in the US for a few reasons, because we will probably have somewhat tighter environmental regulation. And whether it is, we heard some numbers earlier for what proportion that was, but it's still a number. It's an additional cost. I think we also have a weaker supply chain or a less developed supply chain at the moment. So the equipment, at least in the early days, is going to need to be constructed specifically for the market. Interestingly, Quadrilla actually constructed their own drilling rig in Europe to be able to drill their wells. They also had to get their fracking equipment constructed, I think, in North America, but to a CE standard so that it could be used in the EU. So it had to be built, even though there was spare capacity available that could otherwise have been purchased. I think all of those are likely to lead to some additional costs. But how much more, it's just very hard to say until you know the nature of the resource that you're actually producing.
Anyone want to come back on any of those points? Do we have any more questions from the floor? Mark had his hand in the air. You've come back with a question, have you?
It's another one.
Well, let's take Mark, then we'll come here, and then we'll go there. And these will be the three final questions. So.
Thanks, Mark Johnston, EPC. Two maybe. First, Robin, you said what? If the Commission doesn't table legislation in the next 8 weeks, could it be tabled at some future date? And secondly, more broadly, the IEA last year and IPCC last month said essentially for a safe climate future, the majority, probably around 3/4 of the known fossil fuel resources worldwide has to stay in the ground. How does this debate fit with that imperative? And just to give it a local political angle, I read that today Commissioner Barnier, who seems to have begun a campaign to stay in the college next year, is saying, I think particularly in the context of the Philippines situation and thousands being buried in mass graves, that in his words, we have to face up to the climate crisis over the economic crisis. He tweeted this afternoon. Thanks.
Robin, quickly on those very easy questions, very comfortable questions.
I can't contradict Commissioner Barnier, can I? No, I think the climate issue is certainly one which needs to be addressed head on. And basically the college is going to discuss the new climate and energy package early next year. So this will is on the table, and our ambitions on climate, and whether how ambitious we can be considering the economic situation will be at the heart of the debate of the college, no doubt, and in other fora. The first question was,
if you don't do it in the next 8 weeks, can you do it later?
Every option is open. The most likely is will be that we will, in any case, issue some guidance. Whether or not there will be legislation is something to be seen.
Well, that's a clear answer.
But
okay.
sorry. If I may,
Absolutely.
if you want to have legal clarity, you can't do that with only guidance. Guidance will not provide you with the legal certainty that, in certain cases, you may need, and operators may need. If you are subject to a serious risk of legal challenge, will you invest? So, regulation is not bad in itself. Regulation sometimes is necessary, and sometimes is the only way to create clarity, predictability, and the level playing field.
So two final. Sorry, Mr.
I think that Mr. Barnier would prefer shale gas to coal, for instance. I think that it's decreasing of CO2 emissions anyway. So there is no contradiction.
Two last quick questions, one here and then one.
Yes, Antoine Colts, just a little question. Don't you think that the biggest barrier of shale gas in Europe will be logistics? Because, as you've said, shale gas requires a lot of different wells that are geographically separated, sometimes in less developed regions. What are the options that are being studied or have been studied to carry this gas out of the little region to the network, and what would be the impact on the price then?
I mean, the infrastructure to take the gas out isn't such a huge challenge. The European gas network is actually very extensive, and so there are areas where you would have to explore and may have to build brand new infrastructure, but actually the gas networks are usually relatively close. Certainly in Poland, the gas network may need to be debottlenecked, but there is a gas network there that will take the gas away, and debottlenecking should be a manageable cost if you have the gas that in the volumes that would cause you to need to debottleneck. I'm not sure that would be such a huge issue. I think on the logistics there is a bigger issue, which is about getting the drilling rigs on site and getting the sand and chemicals, etc. on site. One thing that will help probably in Europe is that, again, the water network is more extensive in Europe, so you're much less likely to be taking truckloads of water on site as you would in West Texas. You're more likely to tap a sort of main water pipe relatively near the site and connect it across, so that it will be trucks bringing sand and chemicals and pump equipment, but far less trucks than you would have had if you were doing fracking in the middle of the US.
Okay. Anyone else, as we're running out of time? Then we'll just finally you had a quick question.
Well, it's not a question. It's a small statement from North Rhine-Westphalia, as we talked about. Just a short comment about our position. Maybe it could be useful for this discussion tonight to hear how North Rhine-Westphalia, the most populated state in Germany, 18 million inhabitants, deal with the fracking issue. So we have a clear decision. Our government considers that in the current state of affairs, it is irresponsible to authorize projects aimed at prospecting and extracting unconventional natural gas by using the fracking technology with all its environmentally toxic emissions. So we had commissioned last year in September an expert report which had commissioned together with a risk assessment study which said it analyzed the possible impact on the environment, especially on the public drinking water supply. And the experts recommend not to authorize the use of fracking unless some special preconditions are met. This includes, for example, avoiding clearly and traceably any possible risk of fracking additives and
finding a sound solution for the flowback disposal in terms of waste management and legislation and of water management and legislation. And so we, with our 80 million inhabitants, we do have the concerns about the public reaction as well. And our Minister President, she was in Canada and in the United States and visited some fracking sites, and she saw the environmental impact. And she can't imagine really that in North Rhine-Westphalia the people would accept this massive impact of the environment at all. So we are very skeptical, and that's why we in North Rhine-Westphalia we do have a moratorium about fracking and drilling. And as far as I know, in Germany we are just in a phase where the new government is built up and where we are in coalition talks. And as far as I know, the next German government will decide on a moratorium as well. So we are very skeptical, both in North Rhine-Westphalia and in Germany at all, about the environmental impact of fracking.
Yeah, Mr. Liège.
Something which has not been touched upon is are the alternative techniques to fracking, or to alternative to chemicals-based, water-based fracking. And these technologies might, propane, for instance, might, which is being commercially exploited in the US and Canada in particular, might provide us with a way forward.
Okay, so we have discussion material for another event. We've come to our time. I'd like to invite Alison Golliger of Shale to make some closing remarks. A tough job, Alison, but good luck.
Tough job indeed. No, thank you very much indeed to all the speakers. That was a really a fascinating debate, and I think actually you've made pretty much all my points all the way through. So I'll keep this quite short because I realise we're tight on time. And I think it's very interesting for me. I look after Shell's business internationally in unconventionals, which covers shale gas, shale oil, tight gas, and tight oil. And it's very interesting to hear the particular European perspective. So that's given me a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much for that. I think I've kind of 3 or 4 main points to make, and one of them is, in my view, in our view, I think it is almost beyond any reasonable data that we have that energy demand is going to go up, and that we need to find something to fill the gap between now and 2050. And I think the question is, how do we do that? And it is the belief of I think most people that all different sources are going to have to contribute. And I think the question for Europe is really, to what extent will unconventional resources contribute to that in Europe, potentially in a large sense in somewhere like Poland, as we heard, where the only other option perhaps is one that is not so comfortable, coal, but perhaps in other areas where they have a different mix, a different energy mix, that might not need to be the case. So I think there's a question of how much, and I think that's kind of up to us here in Europe to decide how we introduce guidance or legislation, the mixture between global and local, if you like, so a global debate but a local execution, I think is very important. I don't think we can also underestimate the carbon footprint. So the IPCC report, I think, was pretty clear on the urgency of action. And we are a bit between the devil and the deep blue sea, because we do have a period of time where we don't have a way to fill this energy gap. And we really believe that gas as a sort of transition fuel, as we heard, is a clean alternative, abundant and available, is a really valid option for that in the short term. And the last point just is a point on cost competitiveness. And again, I think this is an interesting one for Europe. I think this is very much within your gift. Just to comment, I've just come back after spending 6 years living in the Middle East and the Far East. And there is no doubt in my mind that the only thing that's limiting the growth in those areas is energy, with one small exception perhaps in China, and that is their pollution. And this is what is driving a lot of the development of their gas, their shale gas and their conventional gas. Because when I'm standing in our offices in Beijing and you can't see that window, this is not a good place to be. So this is something we shouldn't underestimate, how fast this is going to drive development in the East. And they haven't had the financial crisis the way that we have here in Europe. So they're growing, and they're growing fast. So that's something for Europe to bear in mind from the cost competitiveness perspective. I think the other point is that, as all of the speakers have alluded to, I do think it's going to take time.
Peter commented that in the 80s, the US was just in its infancy. It actually was fiddling around even some years before that, back as far as the 50s and the 60s. And in fact, the very first gas produced in the US was produced from a shale gas well way back in the century before last now. And of course, we can't underestimate, they have hundreds of thousands of wells. They have hundreds of thousands of bits of data and bits of information. And all of this data, almost all of this data, is openly available. So for us globally, we're in a completely different place. So it is very early days for us. I do agree, I think we can go faster. Again, that's up to us, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But we do need proper data and proper information. And there is no substitute for that than actually, unfortunately, drilling the well and collecting the information. And I think if we can do that in a way that keeps everybody comfortable and informed by data, we can learn a lot. And then we can really perhaps decide whether or not we can answer the question that's on the screen, a game changer or not. I think Mr. Brezina also commented that this is very technically challenging. And there was a phrase when I first got involved in this business about a year ago where we used to talk about the operations in the US and Canada developing through brawn over brains, not perhaps very complimentary to our colleagues in North America. But I think for us in Europe, this is something we really need to think about. This is not going to be a brawn over brains discussion. This needs to be a brains over brawn discussion for many of the reasons that we've heard discussed here today. And I think also interestingly, I spent the first 17 or 18 years of my life working for an oilfield service company based here in Europe. So there are a wide range of suppliers and supply chain companies available here in Europe. We just don't know very much about them because we don't have a very big conventional industry. They are, some of them, globally leading across the board. So the capability is there. It just needs to be nurtured and expanded. Also, I think the other thing that's going to be very important in the taking time is we do need to agree, and the IEA has helped a lot with the golden rules, on how we bring the best practices and the learnings that we have to bear across the whole world. We don't want to make the same mistakes in one country and again in the next country. That's not acceptable for us. We're in a global community now. We can't and we shouldn't do that. So we really believe that good standards, good regulations, that leave space for best practice, which, as somebody commented, is changing very, very fast, perhaps even faster than 45 days. We need to constantly be trying to do that. And so I think it will take time for legislation and for guidance to find its way to balance between local execution and what guidance can bring to bear. My third point is perhaps the most important one. It's going to take debate. I think in the world we live in today, and I comment on this often, we talk about a shale revolution. I think this is a social revolution in energy. I think today more than ever, all of us are now involved in wanting to be a part of the decisions that are made as to what happens when we switch our lights on. And this is not an easy debate, particularly for us in Europe, because we have very little experience of the hydrocarbon industry. It's all offshore. Some parts of the world are very well experienced, some parts of Europe are very well experienced, but many of us aren't. So I think there's a lot of things which aren't known, aren't familiar, and that's a huge difference with the US when you spend time in the States or in Canada, where this industry has been in the DNA of people for 100 years or more. So I think also Mr. Miege also commented on clarifications needed around water. And he raised a very good point there at the end. There are many ways to, make an omelette. So fracking doesn't have to use water, and there in fact is a lot of technology developments going on which can, and we hope will continue, to minimise or get rid of the use and the need for water altogether. Interestingly, in some places we have too much water as a result of fracking, so you've got a disposal problem, and we've had opportunities where we've been able to put that water to use in local applications where the local community was water poor. So again, I think there is a debate to be had here about, back to the point that was made earlier, about how can you make somebody's problem into a solution somewhere else, and that requires a very engaged and kind of multifaceted thinking about the problems. And I think it's really good news in Poland that you've got folks that have taken time and are keen and willing to see what can be done. So my last point really, just to close out, is one that I personally feel about. This can make a difference. It really can make a difference. I think when you stand in China and you can't see out the window, you know, we have to take some responsibility for the contribution that gas can make to lowering CO2 emissions. And there's been a very interesting study done by the UT in the US recently that looked at both completion emissions and fugitive emissions. And we've learned a lot from that in the industry. So the completions emission side showed much better results than we thought. And the fugitive emission sides didn't. It showed that there were some issues that we didn't even know we had, which might sound strange for me to say it, but is really good news because we know now what we need to do to go fix them. So this is the real benefit for me for having data, having information, and using that to inform and learn in a very fast way. I think the other thing that is interesting, we have a perception that this is a very highly intense, infrastructure-heavy industry. It has been in the US. Again, as technology develops, I think we'll see that less and less. And again, this is the brains over brawn element, whereas before it was described to me as scattergun. You know, you take your shotgun and you drill everywhere where the shot lies, because you didn't really have enough understanding, and you could do it. I don't think that's where we are in the rest of the world. I think there is absolutely a need for us to apply the best that we know, the best that we understand, and standards and regulations that will hold us in good stead for generations to come. Very important. And another element which was mentioned, which we can't avoid, there's a lot of communities now in the US which have suffered for 50, 60 years through lack of industry, who are now really benefiting from the knock-on sort of multiplier effect, if you like, of what this industry brings back. It brings tax revenues, it brings all different types of jobs and opportunities. So I think it can make a difference, but I think it really does require thoughtful combination of guidance and regulation. What industry needs is consistency. We would like to have best practice. We would like to have standards set that all of us can adhere to. We are more than happy and very willing and very open to have the debate, as we've seen it being extremely successful in other parts of the world, where you have many people around the table and we can spend the time to talk and to explain and to understand each other's perspectives. So, if we have a huge opportunity, in an answer to the question, I think we have a huge opportunity in Europe. And I think if we do say no, I think it should be for the right reason. It should be because when we go to try to find a way to exploit, we can't because it's not economic, or because the impact is too high, or because the data tells us it's not possible. So if we're going to condemn the opportunity, I'd like us to do it on the basis of data, and that requires a cooperation and a collaboration, which in fact is the point of all of these comment and vision debates, which brings me just to my final point, I think, which is to thank European Voice very much indeed, and Euronews for joining us and hosting these debates. It is only through debate in today's environment, I think, where we'll continue to work around these issues, and I think that's the whole focus of this. It's collaboration, integration, and having the opportunity to hear everybody's different perspectives. And also to Noordrijn-Westfalen, who's not with us anymore, but to thank him very much for hosting us here today. And I think we'll have a chance to chat later on. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks. So it remains only for me to thank all the speakers tonight for some very, very rich discussions, and for you for attending. I'm pleased to announce there is a reception. You've waited a long time. I know we're a little bit over time, but I think it was worth it. There was a reception being served next door.